Hattiesburg house is my grandparents' home and farm in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Uh, my relation to this place in this space is through coming down to Hattiesburg and the property each summer with my cousins, the grandchildren of my grandmother, and ultimately learning through my grandfather's farming and agriculture backgrounds, not only about the traditions and the customs of taking care of land, but also about loving the land and learning from the land. It was something that was very much so informative to my own idea of what it meant to be a custodian of the land and ultimately what it was to be a Black American. I learned much about the history as well. Um, and also the Hattiesburg House was a place that we would congregate for Thanksgiving. So we would all come down for Thanksgiving and enjoy company and enjoy space and place um, as well. Hattiesburg, Mississippi is located kind of sandwiched between Jackson and Biloxi, Mississippi, about an hour and a half from the coast. And you really can either fly into Biloxi or New Orleans. There's no way to fully get into Hattiesburg. There's a small airport, but it's um, uh, 1 to 2 flights a day. It's very few and far between. Um, and to just give a brief introduction to what Hattiesburg is. Hattiesburg is a small town of 45,000 folks, majority Black city with over 52.8% of its population being African American. And it was really a town that came out of the railroad industry and, came from lumber and kind of these raw materials. And it was also a city that was near the Mississippi, but not close enough to have that connection, but still connected to that network. And now it is kind of situated as a military town, as you call it, located by Camp Shelby, as well as, a university town with University of Southern Miss being located in proximity. You can kind of see the adjacent town and the population breakdown of that. Just a little bit of the history. The property that my grandparents owned, the 48 acres, was owned by the Smith family and was passed down from Mr. Smith to his children, and that was passed down to their children. We ended up buying the land from Mr. Smith's grandchild, and there's still 2 descendants of the Smith family on the adjacent properties, Mr. Dwayne and one of Mr. Dwayne's aunts, one of the older members of his family. But ultimately, my family gained access and ownership over this property through one of Mr. Dwayne's aunts, one of Mr. Smith's daughters. And they purchased the property December of 1999 as my grandmother came into town to do a speaking engagement. My grandfather had farmed land his whole life and was interested in buying a property. And when he saw the property, he fell in love and he wanted to call this place home. And by January 20th, 2000, they moved into the property and have owned it for the past 20 years. They brought nothing but a goldfish and some bags and drove from Sacramento to the property. And that was kind of their, reverse migration back to the South. My grandfather had lived in Alabama before and had farmed his whole life, descendants of sharecroppers. And my grandmother actually never lived in the South and had grown up in Kansas City and had moved to Sacramento. So this was kind of something new to her. But also some sort of return, as all of our family's roots are in, Mississippi. So you can see they first purchased the property, of course, closest to the land and to the house which was about 12 acres. And then they purchased another 19 acres, and then they purchased another 9 acres of property. And this was all within a few years spanned, accumulating to about 48 acres of land. And you can kind of see just from this aerial plan view a little bit of what the site is dealing with. So there's two main bodies of water, and then we have a pretty large forest line in adjacent to the site. And you can see also, it's sandwiched between two houses. This is one of descendants of Mr. Smith, one of the granddaughters, Mr. Dwayne's auntie, and this is the house that we are located on, a 2-bedroom home. It's a view from the property, looking from the house onto one of the bodies of water. And just a little bit of a map investigation of what that site looks like. The home is a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, built in 1985, just a 1-story home. And as I began to look at the site, I kind of wanted to zoom out and really look at kind of the relationship between topography and water. As I said, it's located by the Mississippi River, but not close enough to be accessible. But many of those feeder and smaller rivers and streams create this larger network that kind of navigates through and around our site. So as you begin to zoom into the actual property, you can see kind of that relation between the topography and the larger network. That's something I'm interested in, not only in relation to the water runoff and kind of the cyclical nature of the water, but also in relation to the flooding and of course the global warming, as well as the natural phenomena of hurricane. Hurricane Katrina was something that affected not only New Orleans, but the coastal regions all the way up to Hattiesburg. And 80% of Hattiesburg at the time was affected and damaged by Hurricane Katrina. So that's something that is, important when looking at this site. As we kind of get into my first design investigation, the main house, I'm really looking at kind of a few moments and a few ceremonies that were important to this site. So the porch that is adjacent to kind of the outdoor main view of the land. This is the pond where they had, the goldfish, and that was really that main area that's adjacent to my grandparents' bedroom. The kitchen where we would spend time in Thanksgiving is another kind of key moment in here, as well as the guest bedroom where the grandchildren would spend time during the summers. Really, this is kind of what creates the Hattiesburg home, is these key moments. You can look at the space from the outside and kind of see its designed nature, that porch area, the driveway, kind of beginning to look at some of the agriculture, and then there's that pond right there in the front. In the back of the house is where we start to get some of the farming, infrastructure. We have a shed, we have some of the tools, we have the ATV, and in the back is where we start to get some of the actual grown agriculture and infrastructure of the site. And my main, kind of zoomed out site planning investigation really was looking at the navigation through the property. So a ceremony that we would have during Thanksgiving was really navigating through the site and taking a kind of a loop trip through the site to be able to see all of the land and property and be inside the land and property. And that was something that we found very important in just kind of being in close relation to the land and seeing the full land. So that's kind of a brief rundown of, the beginning investigations of that. Now, what I'm looking at now and kind of wanting to drag through this whole process really is the futuring of the site and what the site could look like in the future. Because my grandfather now has passed on, and his true vision of this project and of this site was to have something to pass on to the next generation, and for it to continue to be a space of education as it was for us.